You're listening to the Christian Indie Artists and Songwriters Podcast, the place where faith, music, and life intersect. We exist to help Christian indie artists and songwriters just like you get songs heard. All right, I'm here with my good friend Cedric Israel. How you doing this morning, Cedric?
Man, I'm doing really well, Brian. It's happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Coming to us live from the great country of Texas, right?
Yeah, in Argyle, Texas, just north of Dallas.
Awesome, man. I've still never actually been there, but I know so many Texans. So one of these days we're going to have to high five.
When you come, we'll go get some great barbecue together. It's awesome food out here.
Man, that sounds really good. All I've eaten today so far was a glass full of celery juice. So barbecue sounds much better than that. Yeah, that's not a fun fact, but it's true. So, we've known each other for a few years at this point. I know that you're a great songwriter and a worship leader and just a family man and all of those things. So kind of tell us, how did you get into music in the first place? What was that initial spark like for you?
Yeah, man. Well, I come from a kind of a musical family, especially my mom's side of the family. My mom's a really great singer, and all of her brothers, they had this family band. And then her mom, my grandma, was this little old Mexican lady who went and started bunch of small Hispanic Pentecostal churches. And she was like the worship leader at these churches. And she played like a little bit of guitar, a little bit of piano. Even I once found a drum kit in her closet. Wow. Wow, Grandma. Yeah. That's awesome. That is. So there's definitely, in the family, there's a lot of music. And then when I was about 12 years old, I went to a church summer camp, and I had tried to play some piano. My parents had given me piano lessons when I was 6 years old, but never really took to it. But around 12 years old, went to this church summer camp, and the worship team was playing. I don't even know what song it was, but they had a full band, and the bass player on one of the songs, he had a little slap bass solo where it was like, bow, 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 like just one riff, and it happened at the same spot in the song, and they did it every single day of the week. But during that time, when I first heard that, I thought, what is that? That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Yes. And then so I came back and I told my parents, I said, I think I want to learn the bass. And so my mom talked to her brother who was living up in Redding, California, and got me my first bass, which I still have. And it's like a 1969 Fender Jazz Sunburst bass. Oh, and he got it for $300 from this guy, which is, even back then that was a steal. So, so he got that bass, and I started learning it. And I thought, it was like, well, I'll probably, be excited about this and then get bored in a few months and do something else. But I never got bored with it. I would just sit and just play. As soon as I got home from school, just play hours and hours. And, back in the day as a CD players, and I put on a CD of something and just try to jam along with it as best as I could. And then, and my parents were generous enough to get me lessons. So I started taking bass lessons like right away. I just did like years of lessons and hours of playing a day. And then that turned into, garage bands with friends from church and getting involved in the worship team. And our high school had a really good jazz band. And I got to start playing in the jazz band. And we actually had a teacher there who lived up in the Bay Area. I'm originally from San Jose, California, moved to Texas for graduate school. But in California, this guy was out in the Bay Area, and he was like an artist in residence, and he's a professional Brazilian piano player, just incredible musical chops. And he saw that I had some musical skills. And so he just spent a lot of extra time with me, like teaching me jazz tunes and stuff. We were learning like Herbie Hancock and Jaco Pastorius, and just showing me all this stuff I never would have had any other idea about. And then I was playing at church on the youth worship team, and then started to play for the big church grown-up services, and they had full choirs and orchestras. So there was just a lot of opportunity to play music. So kind of a different time than it is now, and it was before the days of YouTube. So if you wanted to play music, you had to go find other people to play with. You couldn't just be sit in your home studio or your bedroom learning YouTube videos the way people do now and stuff.
I was going to ask you, because you're the first, I think, bass player, because that was my first instrument as well. So I was going to ask you some bass player stuff, like who were some influential bass players coming up for you? Like you mentioned Jaco Pastorius, and any other ones that kind of stood out to kind of shape your playing style?
Yeah. Learning Jocko, or trying to learn Jocko. I shouldn't say learning Jocko, but trying to learn Jocko definitely was an influence. Also at the time, so my parents are big Andre Crouch fans. And so they would they got a CD of the best of Andre Crouch and all the stuff that he had from the 70s. And so I'd listen to it. And the bass player for Andre Crouch at the time, Billy, I forget his last name, but maybe Billy Sudfeld, he could sing, and he played all these cool, just chromatic gospel-y bass lines. And so I tried to figure out the stuff there. So I learned all these kind of cool chromatic bass riffs. And then at the time too, it was 90s country was happening. It was the 90s. And so I think I was putting on country records and trying to figure out what those, studio bass players were doing as well.
I remember, I was in a country band for a while too. And that stuff seems simple, but man, that I remember playing Garth Brooks songs and stuff, and those were the most complex things, just the way that they moved and the way the chords changed. So man, that's a great way to learn through that country stuff, because I just learned through Green Day, and that was actually simpler. But
right, yeah, the country players are so tasteful, and you don't necessarily notice them, but all of a sudden you hear this beautiful melodic riff happening kind of as a counterpoint behind the melodies, and you're like, how did they figure that out? That was the coolest thing I've ever heard.
It's just that soul thing. So, okay. So you picked up bass, you really got attached to it, and then you started doing the band thing. And so, you've been in ministry and you've been writing for a long time. So what took you from sort of the hobbyist, or the sound like the passion was there the whole time? That's the driving force behind it, So what kind of brought you from that day into a more full focus where you're hey, I think music can kind of be my path or my focus for God?
Yeah. Great question. In college, it was kind of, this part of the story is kind of funny. In college, I was I don't know what my degrees should be in. I really like music, but everybody knows that you can't make it in music. And so I was I'm going to get a business degree or a sociology degree. And so I talked to my parents, and my dad is actually, he's a Bible college professor. And my parents actually encouraged me. They said, hey, if you've got a passion for music, focus on that, go all in, study it. And I was are you sure? Shouldn't I just get a business degree and, just go get a normal job? And they're no, go for it while you're young now. And so I was okay. So but I was so close to finishing up a degree in sociology from our Bible college. I was a year and a half away from graduating when we had that conversation. And I was well, maybe I need to switch majors. And my dad's no, just go and get a master's degree in music. And I was you can do that? He's yeah, absolutely. And so I was okay. So I took some music theory classes and started planning to do a master's degree. And then the Lord worked it out, and I went to the University of North Texas. That's how I made it to Texas. University of North Texas, UNT, has a really world-renowned music program. And so, I auditioned, and I got in, and was just totally elated and ecstatic that I was accepted, and made the move down to Denton, Texas, and took 5 years, and I got through a master's degree in jazz studies on the bass. And during that time, I picked up learning to play the acoustic bass. So, so I've got, spent plenty of time with the acoustic bass, and did lab bands and a couple of recordings, and, smaller recordings with students there, but such a great learning tool. And then I've played acoustic bass in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex on various jazz gigs over the last 15 years.
Wow.
So and then on top of that, all that to say is when was the moment that you wanted to do be all in with music? Even back in college, I went for it, and then the Lord opened up a job for me at a church called Valley Creek Church here in Flower Mound, Texas, just about 15 minutes from my house. And I just celebrated my 15th year of being on staff there, and attended for about 2 years before being on staff.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah. So that's just I've grown so much. Really, I say that I've grown up at the church, and my role at the church is a music director. So I'm, rehearsing the teams and trying to make sure that everything on Planning Center is up to date. And boy, has the technology in music has just changed so much, even in the last 10 years, and how we approach things. And then I remember it was when multi-tracks and all that kind of stuff, not just the company, but when the access to listening to the tracks of our favorite worship songs, like, oh, here's a guitar part and here's a drum part and a bass part. I remember that just blowing my mind, like, oh my gosh, the way that they put all this stuff together to make these beautiful songs. I was like, man, I want to learn more about writing songs and producing songs. And then about 5 to 6 years ago, I took my first trip to Nashville, and I went to a conference at the NSAI, Nashville Songwriters Association International, something like that. Yeah. I went to a conference there, and that just blew my mind. We were at this hotel there, Holiday Inn. It was this historic hotel, and they had all these pictures of like Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash around there and stuff. Oh, wow. But the speakers they had, like, oh my gosh, this is the guy who wrote this radio song. This is the person that wrote this radio song. And they would perform them on a guitar or a piano. And it was like, I can't believe I'm hearing that. Like the behind the scenes, like this is the person responsible for that song that I've sung my whole life. That is like the coolest thing I think I've ever seen. After that trip to Nashville, it was kind of like really, really focusing on songwriting and understanding that songwriting could be a commercial endeavor. That songwriting, could be a career. So I really say it's since that trip that it was like, I really wanted to double down on my songwriting. We've gotten involved in various groups that have helped me so much. Songtown, you can find them online. Songtown.com has been an incredible help. The NSAI has been helpful. Kingdom Songs, which Brian, I think we got connected through that. Yeah. With Michael Farron, has been so helpful. So there's so many resources now, but it was about after the trip 5 years ago to Nashville that it was like, man, I want to learn how to songwrite at a super high level and make recordings and be a part of people's projects. And
man, that's awesome. And I kind of have a similar story to where, like, when I took my first trip to Nashville, it was May of 2017. And just like same thing you said, like when you get to see like, wow, like that's just a guy or just a lady who wrote a song that's literally like impacted the world, but like it's possible because we're standing in the same room. It's not like this like locked door that no one can get into. Right. It just takes the effort, but getting the chance to like actually be immersed. I remember my first trip, I walked into the Full Circle event and it was at Seth's old studio, and I walked in there. I was like, this is the first time I've stepped foot in the music industry, and everyone is kind of like me. It wasn't like this, like I'm over in the corner and never worthy. And I don't feel worthy, but you know what I mean? Like it's possible. So I love that sort of sparked it for you. So since then, like, is that kind of when you started diving into the Valley Creek, like projects and stuff? Because I mean, those songs are amazing and they're having major impact. So when did that kind of all start, like the church projects? Oh,
thanks for saying that. By the way, yeah, Full Circle Music and Seth Mosley. I love that resource as well. Highly recommend that people check that as well. It's been incredible for me. Valley Creek. It's really, really funny. And it's a beautiful thing. And one of the things in my life that I feel super just like, man, blessed by the Lord in this. But so back in 2010, and at the time we were singing these amazing Hillsong songs. It was even before, like, With Everything. It was like we were singing a song called Tear Down the Walls, and I remember that being just like, oh, this incredible worship epic song that the congregation would just respond to. And I started to have this feeling like, man, our worship team could write something like that. was my thought. As I go further along to it, I realize it's more than just being able to write something like that. There is so much more involved to it than that. But
it does start there.
But that was kind of the thing, was like, man, there's no reason why we can't be doing this. And so I was trying to kind of write some worship songs, and I wasn't really co-writing. I was just writing by myself. And there's this song that I wrote. I played it for my wife, and she's like, wow, that's pretty good. And I went and I played it for our worship pastor. His name's Ben Moreno, and he's still on staff as well at Valley Creek, one of my best friends in life. And he listened to it. He's like, yeah, man, that's a good song. Like, let's try that like next week. I'm like, okay, cool. So it was a song called Only God. So we did it, and the song, like, it went pretty good. Like, people kind of responded to it, and we played it for a few weeks. Well, that sort of opened the door. Then all of a sudden Ben's like, well, hey man, I've got a song. And we kind of listened to it, like, that's cool too. Let's try that one. And all of a sudden, like, the floodgates opened, and before we knew it, we had like 10 songs that were like these are cool. Let's do something with them. And also at the time we had a transition in our leadership. For the founding pastor of the church had become a missionary to China. And that was an incredible story in itself. And the person that he kind of raised up, Pastor John Stickle, who's still leading Valley Creek to this day and doing an incredible job. He said, "Hey guys, let's go for it. Let's record a worship album." And we're like, all right. So, he found a way to get the money for it to have a worship album. And we hired a producer named Aaron Brown in the area. And he helped us with kind of crafting these songs and getting arrangements. And all of a sudden we had this album come out, and we called the album Only God, based off of the song that I had written. And then at the time, it was when Song Discovery was sending out worship leader like CDs, I don't know, once a quarter around the country to everyone who subscribed to Song Discovery. And the song Only God got featured on one of their CDs. And I was just like, wow. Oh my goodness, this is crazy. This like song that I wrote has now gone all over the country. And I've, heard people like talking about how they sang that song. I was just blown away. And I thought, man, that's my first song. This is going to be so easy.
All uphill from here.
I already, got a song that landed all over the nation. This is going to be so easy. Little did I know. All that to say was that God used me and that song to start something at Valley Creek. And so that was our first CD, Only God, in 2010. And then 5 years later, we had another project that came along, and we were including more writers and more people on staff. One of my best buds, Eric Shutt, who still works at Valley Creek, he wrote just this awesome song called By Cloud, By Fire. And that was the name of the album for at that time at 2015. And that was all self-produced. And then in this last year, we had some leadership changes on the worship staff, but then we got back into writing. And I've always been the person that was like, helping to just like, come on guys, let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. And we got our team kind of in a place where it's like, we feel like we're healthy enough that we can start writing and doing a project again. And then through the Kingdom Songs connection, I got connected to Chris Clayton, which he's become a good friend. And so we were able to partner with him, and he produced our most recent songs, and now the music industry has changed so much that it's not releasing an album anymore of 10 songs. We had this live worship night and recorded 5 songs, and then we released them every, 3 to 4 weeks or so. If you check out Valley Creek Worship now, you can find us on Instagram and Spotify and Apple Music and all the streaming services. And like, we don't even like put the money into making CDs anymore. It's just all streaming. We've got such an incredible team of worship leaders and writers now. Brandon Primo and Jonathan Zavala are these younger guys that the church has raised up that are just writing incredible songs. And I'm learning a ton from them, as styles change, like the way I heard melodies and stuff from, the days of Tear Down the Wall with Hillsong 10 years ago has changed so much. And now it's like just learning all these whole different melodies and ways to write music.
Okay, so one thing you said in there that I think is important to dig into a little bit more is, you started with that Only God, and it was like, boom, it's like, man, I'm just a pro. It's just what I do, but obviously there's a lot of ups and downs, with anything in life, but creative endeavors especially. So what are some things that you used or maybe leaned on to kind of help you? Because like you said, you've gone through some leadership changes and a lot of things that like pretty easily could like let this Valley Creek thing and like songwriting for you in general just kind of fall by the wayside because it's like an extra thing. It's another thing to consider in the busy life. So like, what are some things that kind of kept you going and kept you like charging forward and always, and like kind of never letting that, fall by the wayside? Like what helped you keep that moving?
Yeah, man, really good question. I think for me, one of the things that I do well, and man, you could say I've been at Valley Creek for 15 years through multiple changes, celebrating 19 years of marriage with my wife. Awesome. It's like, I just have this persistence, I guess, that like, I'm not going to stop. And it's not that I'm like, I don't know. It's not necessarily that the passion. It's just kind of like, man, this is just part of who I am. And I've realized this. I was telling my family this the other day, but I've realized that there's three things that I know that I'm in a really good spot as I, get older here and kind of reflect, learning more about myself. Number one, if I'm eating healthy, I feel good about myself. Number two, if I'm exercising, I'm feeling good about myself. And then number three, if I'm keeping up with my songwriting, I feel good about myself. And whenever I start sliding in any one of those areas, I just find myself like all of a sudden complaining and feeling negative about things. But if I'm moving forward in those areas, especially when I'm doing them all together, man, I just feel like unstoppable. That's kind of regardless of where I'm at or what's going on. It's like, if I keep moving forward in those things, man, I love my life.
Man, that's so good. I have a personal quote. I don't know, maybe I heard it from someone else, but it's like a formula for success is patience plus persistence equals success. And it's like, but persistence kind of it could be perseverance, whatever, but it kind of gets a negative rap sometimes because it's like, oh, you're persistent, you're annoying. It's like, I don't think so. I don't think that word has a negative connotation. I think it's that drive, that grit, which is what you're saying, but then you have to mix that with the patience because probably just like me, like you're like, man, I want to do it. And then it's like, oh man, I don't want to wait. It's like, I'm ready now, but it's that blend of perseverance and patience that ultimately will equal the success. And like you said, kind of like when you're doing the things that God has highlighted for you that work well through, exercise, diet, and songwriting, like you're like a superhero, you're at your best.
Yeah.
But there is an element of like, you have to be willing to wait and know that ebbs and flows, because some seasons you may not be able to write as much and you'll notice that, but that it'll come back around. So you're always willing to push, man. So that's awesome. So, I mean, that kind of leads into this other thing I always like to ask people is like, what's some advice, you'd give to younger Cedric when you're getting started before all this songwriting journey and everything started? Like, what's something you'd say to your younger self and to our audience to encourage them along their journey?
I've been, you asked me that question a few weeks ago when you said, hey, you want to be on your podcast? And I was like, really, me? And so I've been thinking about it, but here's what I would tell younger Cedric. I think, and even before we started recording for this podcast, we were just talking about where we are in our journeys right now. And you're talking about anxiety, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally get that. One thing that's been helpful for me is like learning about the Enneagram, and like I'm a 6. And so it's suddenly, man, when I read, that's one of those books where you read it and you're like, who's been following me around with my camera my whole life? And,
is this the Truman Show? What's happening?
Exactly. Being an Enneagram 6, realizing how much fear is a driving motivator in my life, and like fear and the need for security. And so this is what I tell my younger self, would be knowing the difference between fear and anxiety. And fear is something that's a realistic thing that's happening. Like if you're being chased around by an axe murderer or your house is being broken into or something like that, like that's a legitimate, realistic fear. Anxiety is constantly worrying about when that's going to happen.
Wow. Yeah, that's good.
And it's like most of the times that's just not going to materialize. And so anxiety, all that anxiety is doing is it's kind of stealing today's joy and tomorrow's potential. Just realizing like, don't spend so much time letting my mind wander into anxiety about what if. Like it's not helping. So I would tell myself that. That's
amazing. Like, so the verse that I've been running through in my mind a lot is, don't be anxious for anything, but in everything through prayer and petition and thanksgiving, present your request to the Lord. And it's like that Thanksgiving part is like, it almost feels like a run-on sentence sometimes. It's like, oh, you threw that in there, but it's like, nope, because that's the thing that can actually wash away. Because I always like fear, anxiety, and thankfulness cannot exist in the same room. They don't hang out together. So like, I think that line always stands out to me because, like anxiety, I feel like is such a tool of the enemy. And I know that's something that, we say a lot, but like, it's so true because like, I'll wake up some mornings, I'll be like, oh man, what do I got to do today? It's like, oh man, I'm anxious about that. Even like it could be like a podcast interview or co-write like that night. It's like, because it's further away, my brain's like, oh man, you're nervous about that. You're anxious about that. But then I'll like come outside of myself and be like, wait a minute, I love to do that. Like, why is the devil trying to mess with my head and tell me that I don't, and I think that's because the things that we can kind of come alive in And, when God shows up in our weaknesses and becomes perfect, like those are the things that the enemy wants to block. And I think that anxiety is one of the strongest weapons that he has to use against us, So like in that, yeah, like anxiety just kind of keeps us freaking out and like afraid to do things that really are the things that probably we need to do the most. And I've heard it said like, whatever you fear most is exactly what you should be doing. And I feel like maybe that quote actually works a little bit better. Like whatever you're anxious, because like you said, fear is a real thing. Like you have a threat to your life or your, like someone's trying to hurt you. Like that's fear and that's real. But anxiety is in your head and it's real too, but it's like perceived fear instead of actual fear. So like, of course, the enemy wants to use that because it's like, oh, you're not going to do anything good for God if you're freaking out about it. Even if you love it, I'm still going to try to mess with your head.
That's so good. And, I love what you said there too. Our pastor did a whole series, and one of his main points was that using gratitude as a weapon.
Man,
I
yes.
love how you said that about, that verse, that scripture about cast all your cares and you have Thanksgiving and stuff, because those can't live in the same place. So yeah, gratitude is a weapon. And that's a weapon that I need to pick up more often for sure.
It's hard because when you're at your low point and you're like, oh man, why don't I have that? Why am I only this far along? It's like, if you just like, God, like, thank you for the house that I'm sitting in, or thank you for the kids that I'm hanging out with. And I mean, sometimes people could be like, oh, that's like foo-foo, but like, no way. Like that is a thing. Like when you start fix your mind on things above, right? Like when you do that and are thankful for those things, then all of that worry just is like, oh wait, that is just kind of an irrational thing that's now gone, because I've had days, man, where like I'll get so like wrapped up in something that I'll be like in a panic mode for like hours, but for no reason. It's just anxiety is like poisoning the well, So, man, I'm glad you said that, because that's definitely a really valuable lesson. And I think now more than ever, like there's anxiety just running rampant on this planet. So I love that you said that, because that is so key to us actually continuing to pursue what God has made us to do. So, man, so much good stuff here. So thank you for being here. What's the best way that any Valley Creek stuff is coming up, or like anything you want to share about? And then also how people can find and connect with you and the church too.
Sure. Yes, Valley Creek stuff. We have more songs coming out this fall. So please follow us on Spotify and check us out on Apple Music and, all the social media areas. So yeah, check out Valley Creek Worship. And we have more releases coming out this fall. We also have a kids music thing that I help out with quite a bit. In fact, I was just in the studio the other day as we were recording lead vocals for our kids music project. So that's cool. been a really, really cool thing. And my son now is 7 years old, and he's going to help kind of sing out in the kids choir that we have for that. So, it's awesome. It's fun to see. He's got some musical chops too. So it's exciting to see that. I'm looking forward to see what happens with that. As far as me you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. On my Instagram, I'm at Cedric Ryan Songs. That's CEDRIC RYAN, then Songs. Cedric Ryan Songs at Instagram. And find me on Facebook. And go ahead and message me, and would love to connect with people and hear your story and what you're up to, and if maybe we can partner together on some things.
Cool, man. And before I go, I'd love to pray over you and just see God as he's doing all the things in your life. So God, thank you so much for Cedric. Thank you so much for his family and the impact that all kind of started with this love for the bass guitar so many years ago. And then to see the passion that you put in there in him, and that he's not, willing to kind of let that go by the wayside, just giving that full focus and attention, Lord, and how the songs that he's been a part of and will be a part of just continue to bless the planet for you, God. And we just pray extra creativity and extra favor and extra blessing over him and his family and health and all of those things that come from you, God. And any anxiety that kind of the enemy tries to put up to get in the way of that, God, just let him dismiss that through a thankful heart and the humble guy that he is, God. We just thank you for Cedric. We thank you for his mission and his just great outlook on life and his encouragement, God. We thank you so much. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We want to help reach as many Christian indie artists and songwriters as possible, and one way we can do that is with your help. So if you could take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes, that would be so appreciated. This is how the iTunes algorithm will push this content out to more and more Christian indie artists and songwriters. So like I said, if you could just take a couple seconds, leave us a review, that would be so awesome, means so much to us, and we would really appreciate it.